All right, so in the Solution Explorer here, you're going to see effectively a full stack implementation of what we have so far. Now, up until really today, well, yesterday, I met with Val, and there were a couple ways in which we needed to tackle what ODE or DEW calls the BFF, which is backend for front end. And effectively, it is like having an API accessible for just the front end piece of it. So, for example, in this case, the web client happens to be Angular. You'd want something that really the Angular client can communicate with and potentially not have to worry about downstream services. Let that also serve as a gateway, a service aggregator, et cetera, et cetera. And really, its whole purpose is just to really to serve and serve the Angular application securely. Does that make sense? So up until really yesterday, we didn't really have this, and so Val and I just talked about adding that in, and really it helps us suffice the rest of the because this part of it too, we can actually auto generate all of it. And so at this point, from what you're seeing from, and I'll step through each one of these layers here so we can talk about it. But the purpose behind CodeFactory in general is that we have the ability to auto-generate and emit whatever code that we need, and it truly is agnostic. Hence, up until this point, I've been emitting .NET code for both .NET Standard and .NET Core, and I am now emitting TypeScript code as well to help support our Angular efforts. And so the idea here is that, developers, we put up the guardrails. This helps us enforce architecture patterns. This also helps us future-proof our platform in the future for the ever-evolving technology changes. So for example, in the future, if we decide that, hey, gRPC is a really good backend service, maybe we're going to see some performance gains from it or whatever it might be. Maybe we want to use function apps or some other technology stack instead of REST services. So this is why we insulate the layer between our presentation layer and our transport layer, which is where that REST service sits, with an abstraction layer. And this really helps. Again, we're going to be generating that, so this isn't code that developers have to necessarily create by hand and maintain going forward. This is why these layers typically don't exist in a lot of Karman architectures, because somebody has to maintain all of them. And to maintain this many layers would be a completely mundane task that would require a much larger team than we have today. So the beauty of CodeFactory, down the road, if we end up changing to gRPC or some other service protocol, the client, in this case, our Angular application, doesn't have to worry about it. It just needs to communicate to the BFF layer and hence to the abstraction layer. And then however it's getting its data, it doesn't really have to care about that. So it allows us in the future to be, to actually even implement, multiple service protocols and things like that. So the same thing happens if we had a split architecture of, we have some of the data coming from Oracle and some of it coming from SQL. I know that's not the case for us because our data repo is all SQL at the moment, but that's the idea behind this. And so quickly go through the different layers and what they mean and the purposes they serve. We'll start with this global tier here. This is a global app model, and this code has already been generated already. So you can see, all of these models came from our database effectively. So I ran a scaffolding command and it outputted effectively all of my entity framework models. I used that to click a button and it generated all of these models for me automatically. So if we make updates to our database, this allows us to use a database first approach where we have a lot of these entities and like our data schema already exists in our data repo, i.e. SQL. And we have the ability at that point to scaffold or create our entire stack all the way up to the UI, which we've demonstrated that very successfully, how this happens. So, the app model is where all of our models exist that are common to, in this case, Drive's project. So this is common domain models for organizations, IRNs, all of our different modules that we have and everything. Again, it's our whole ecosystem of models so that we have a common object model that everything can understand and interpret. So the presentation layer, in this case, we have one project in there. This is actually our Angular project. This is actually a very skinned down version of what you guys have today, for the simplicity reasons of I'm finishing the automation for this, but once, and really it'll be tomorrow, maybe Friday, Monday at the absolute latest, because I may want to spend about half a day testing on this. But ultimately, this, as of next week, will actually be our Drive's web application, and then we will be done, like in terms of the entire stack automation. So this is my last little pig here to finish, and then we should be good from there. The third layer that you're seeing here is the BFF layer, the backend for front end. I talked about this a little bit earlier. This is really, what the Angular project is, in terms of fetching and retrieving and doing full CRUD operations. This is where it needs to, this is the protocol or the endpoint that it's going to communicate. Fourth layer is the abstraction layer. I also mentioned this. This is the buffer really between our BFF and the transport layer. So again, in the likelihood that 2 years from now, the service layer or protocol or technology is going to change, we won't have to worry about necessarily everything from this point forward or up the chain. The fifth layer is the transport layer. This is and at each of these levels, I have other projects. The way that we actually create and generate our stacks from either top to bottom or bottom to top is based on contracts. And these contracts are just interfaces. So we use a method that helps us, with a maintenance-centric architecture pattern here, where we do contract-driven development. And our contracts really just help us keep a very strong cohesion from top to bottom. Without contracts, it's like everything else, right? You wouldn't buy your house without a contract. So without contracts, then we have a lot of code everywhere that doesn't have a consistent theme or unification. So with that being said, the abstraction layer, we do have tests, some integration tests here that also are getting auto-generated, as well as we have the actual service itself. Well, the transport, this actually communicates directly with the transport REST service. And then on the REST service layer, what you're going to see here is there's going to be a model project, which is for anything that the REST service needs in terms of how the REST service is compiled here. The sixth layer here is the logic layer. So we talked earlier about, or I mentioned the analogy of like if you're bowling, just putting up the guardrails, or for us, to enforce architecture patterns and governance. All these layers help us in a lot of ways in order to accomplish that goal. One of the biggest things that we do with CodeFactory is that there are a couple places in the stack where we will have developers effectively paint in the lines. So everything else in terms of logging, and I'll get to the individual classes here in a minute in terms of its structure and like basically its programmable makeup. But essentially, this logic layer here is where I would anticipate that this is actually the business logic for the stack. So when you have things that, let's say that I want to delete an SFPS report, well, I can't just go delete a report, right? Or maybe I want to go delete, let's say a module. So everything related to T1, I can't really do that, at least not very easily. So this is where, as I update or delete things, maybe there are other things, other entities out there that I need to go massage or update as well through that process. So all that business logic is going to exist here at the logic layer. This is This project right here, the Drives Logic project, this is specifically where developers are going to be, again, painting in the lines. I'll go through again the schematics of this here in a minute, but I want to finish at least going through our data model. So our data layer here is made up of our contracts and then our SQL repositories. Again, these were already generated with CodeFactory. So I think right now we're sitting around 160 or 170,000 lines of code. This is code complete repositories with full CRUD capabilities. So any entity that was sitting in SQL, we now have the ability to create, update, delete. Now how we, and then also I can actually get one particular record based on the key, and as well as I did add another one in there that should be a part of everything, which is get all. And get all might mean something different, right? For reports, it means get all means I'm going to pass in a report code like T1 and a year. So that logic lives in the data repository. So as I finish development of, let's say, each of these methods, then from there I just persist. I would generate the code through the logic layer all the way up the stack and expose it to the Angular one project. The other pieces of this are our integration test and then our SQL models. And these models here, this entities folder you're seeing, this is exactly everything I was scaffolded from SQL. So if I look at any one of these things, this is what the scaffolding command generated for me. And so how CodeFactory works is I'm able to click on any one of these entities here, and I have one called refresh EF repository. So refresh EF repository is going to create my data repository for me, which is this next layer up. And that's how I got this, this implementation right here. So with everything that we're doing, we're implementing full, what we call NDF or net delivery framework, which includes, for every method that we're emitting code or generating, whether it be down here in the data repository layer or all the way up to the UI and exposing something to our Angular code in a method called maybe get all reports or whatever, right? So in every instance of this, we want to be to really improve our code quality and be consistent. We want to make sure that for every method, and this is one of our governing patterns, right? From an architecture perspective, this is one of the first things that gets dropped when we just have developers coding every layer of this, is that these things are very time consuming. This is all that boring, monotonous, very time consuming coding efforts. It's one thing if we can get developers to add comments and documentation to all of our classes, but it's another thing to consistently have our entire development team be delivering full NDF, implementation. So what I mean by that is every method, no matter what it is, needs to have entrance and exit logging. We need to also have bounds checking on any parameters that are coming in, a proper bounds checking. And then, we want to be implementing a try catch to catch our, managed and unhandled exceptions through our stacks. And exception handling will be something different at every layer. Since we are in the data repository layer, we have a couple other levels of exception that we are catching beyond just a regular standard unhandled exception. So that being said, DB updates exceptions, SQL exceptions, etc. So again, these are things that developers, they don't have to worry about. At every single level, really, it's this code inside of here. Again, this was generated automatically, but this would be where developers would paint the lines. Make sense so far? Any questions before I go back up the stack? And so I'd like to give you guys an example of the code generation pieces of this. So when I click a button, I'm generating up, the stack above me based on the contract. And so we'll get up to the UI and then I'll demonstrate that piece of it working as well. And then that will actually finish my demo part of this and my updates to the team. Because I really want you guys to see it working in action. I suspect that right now, we're sitting around 100 and, like I said, 60 to 70,000 lines of code. And this is just all that we've generated so far is this global layer here in this, this app model project and in these two projects here. Well, actually, our entire data repository layer. So these 4 projects. So the only thing that I'm exposing at this point through a REST service is our SFPS report, so that we can go fetch the whole list. So today I'm gonna demonstrate to you, if we needed another thing exposed, I'm gonna randomly pick one here in our data contracts, and I'll stick with the SFPS since we're kind of like in that domain right now. And I'll just go to the first one, which will be access. So in this case, I always want to go to the contract, which is this. And I say contract, this is literally just an interface, right? It's just going to tell everything above me how and what to implement. And so at this point, I have a command that we've created called update logic implementation. It's going to actually do a refresh on my entire logic. So, the great thing about this is if code already exists, it's not going to overwrite your code. It's actually going to then make updates. So when we are doing these updates, it actually, we know that looking at any specific class, and I'll go into it so you can see what was generated. So this entire probably 200 lines of code, roughly, were generated automatically. And this is, again, code complete. I'm even taking it one step further in my logic implementation, where I'm just giving you a default behavior so that you can actually build your logic layer up. In a previous version of this, we were just throwing in a comment here like a to-do, implement logic, like business logic. And so in this case, I'm like, well, if we already know these things, and I'm just going to go ahead and call down to the data repos up. The data repository, I'm going to actually, persist the call through so that we don't have to necessarily write these, what would be 5 lines of code. So even this part of it, I'm already doing for you guys, so you don't have to worry about it. If we need to do something, like I said, with updates and other things, deletes, then we can certainly, here is where you would be making those updates, because maybe I don't want to return back this update result yet. Maybe there's something else I need to go do. And sorry, there's a cat around me. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll generate the actual REST service implementation. So I'm gonna go back to that same contract, and I'm gonna go to my contract for the SFPS access, and I'm going to generate the REST service now. So that being said, for all these projects, for the contract, the test, and the actual REST implementation, I now have a full REST controller that was created as an endpoint. I'll save it. For my REST service, fully annotated and everything. Again, already wired up, code complete. This is where I would never expect developers to be in as well. This should just be something that you just generate and then it's there. So the very next thing, so we still aren't at a point yet. Technically I could hit this REST service. So if I wanted to run this, let me just show you what it looks like. I'll just set this as my startup project. Well, I'll wait till the end because I'm going to run actually the BFF and the REST service, and then I'm going to run the Angular project all at once so you can see all 3 and how they are related. And then, so once this is done, I'm going to go to my abstraction contract, because now I really want to generate the BFF. So I'm going to go to this contract here for the abstraction contract, and I'm going to actually refresh the BFF. And I say components here because what's actually going to happen starting tomorrow is, or as of tomorrow or Friday, is that there's going to be I'm actually going to prompt a dialog box. This is for folks who are working on the Angular code. Is that I'm going to prompt a dialog box there, and that there's going to be a drop-down list of all modules. So when you select, for example, T1, then you're going to hit OK, and then that's when I'm going to be doing a little bit more crazy things with the generation of this code. Because, for example, if I go look at the SFPS report controller, Val and I have had several conversations about this, but we want to also enhance the naming convention for how we actually route in and expose this data to. So beyond versioning, right? We want to be able to say, yep, for V1, for T1, we want the reports, if that's where it's supposed to go anyway. And so the developer will basically be selecting that. And if let's say you select the wrong one, no big deal, we'll just go, delete it and then regenerate it again. That's the beauty of this, is that it takes literally one click, a few seconds of time. And the other thing that we're going to be doing, so once you select that, then I generate this. I'm actually going to be going into this is the code I'm working on right now. So I'll be going into the actual Angular project. You've already told me that let's say SFPS report, that needs to go into T1. So the very first thing I'm going to do is create this model here automatically for you. But you don't have to do that as a developer, and as well as the service implementation for the local service that will communicate and transact back and forth with the BFF. So these two layers here within the UI is probably right now where we're going to call it quits, because this really gets us. You need data, then just click a button and you should have it. Since again, this is of course this is just CRUD behaviors. I know we're going to have a lot of other methods that you guys will want to create as well as time goes on. So when you do that, you're just going to go to the contract, like the logic layer, for example, and you're going to just add it to the contract. Let's say that I'm just going to call one called, I already have one for like get all reports, but if you wanted to call something like get 2023 reports, I suppose you can make a method for that. Like it's your business logic. So if that's what makes sense to Val or whoever, then you're going to be doing that implementation right there in the logic tier, and then just refreshing all the way up the stack here. At some point, I probably will just start to compile these calls. It's nice to walk through this one layer at a time and generate the next layer up automatically, and show each of the areas, right, and the code that was generated. But in the future, we may want to take one step forward and just straight from the logic tier, just auto generate all the code in one click all the way up to the and refresh, REST abstraction and the BFF all in one shot.
Hey Roger, I actually prefer to have an ability to generate code from the logic layer upwards, and sort of separate repository generation from API generation, because a lot of times it's not going to be just a simple get
right,
like a CRUD operation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might want to have some methods in a logic layer that reflect a business language. They might sort of do an update, but it's not going to be a full update, and it might have some business logic around it. So I would prefer to be able to generate a repository first, and then if I have a situation when I want to generate contracts starting from business logic, I should be able to do so. And what else I wanted to add? And it would be nice to have.
That's the goal of the logic layer. There is that while we do need to obviously enforce and implement anything that's from the repository layer into the logic layer, but if you would have other things, it could even be just something that's not even getting data, right? It's just something that's parsing an object that's coming in, maybe doing a calculation. It's up to you guys to find what actually is the business logic, but certainly it could be even non-functional methods that don't even communicate with the repository, but you want everything up the stack to have access to it. So, and that's where that logic should live, by the way. But
yeah, another thing would be nice to have is an ability to, let's say, extend a contract on the logic layer by adding, let's say, a method to an interface, and be able to refresh implementation of that interface, and be able to generate like as this placeholder method with exception handling, arguments, check for nulls, etc. Starting from doing it from the logic contract itself.
Yeah, so I mean that's already kind of built in though.
Okay.
So ultimately, like for the SFPS report, if I were to just create something new here, another method.
Oh, okay. If it's
the method here,
like that,
I update the contract, and then ultimately now in my logic, it's going to bark at me if I try to compile, right? It's going to say, well, you're not implementing something. So I can actually go here, and there's actually one called add missing logic members, and that's going to add that in automatically. So this is actually only here when we have something that we're not going to add. So for example, if I were to undo this, and then I go back up, and I don't have to save it even. It knows it real time through a RAWs done through the compiler. So if I go back up here, now you're going to see that that's not there anymore. So that command's only there, and it serves that exact purpose. It's so that then I can just generate my logic, the missing logic members in my implementation, and then away we go. So once you actually get the implementation done, then I'll be able to go back to my contract and say, okay, this is right. Now go ahead and generate now my REST service.
Okay. All right.
So I'll go ahead and run this now. Let me generate all this stuff off the top. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So this is my Angular project kicking up and building, and then we have the REST service. And we have, so this is going to take a minute because I'm waiting for my REST service. So I did my startup as a multi-startup project. So I just want to show you guys all the full stack implementation. Most likely you guys won't be opening the solution that I'm in right now, because this is really just for full stack generation. If you're just working in the Angular project, you're probably going to do what you're doing today. You're going to open it up in Visual Studio Code. And again, as you guys are making updates, let's say to your services or your service implementation or your BFF or your logic layer, right? Somebody will do that in a way that they can generate up the stack and expose those things to you, and then obviously redeploy through a pipeline once they check in their changes and test it. But it'll redeploy your endpoint so that But if you did want to, let's say, debug the entire full stack, then you're going to do what I'm doing right now, which is just multiple startup projects. So this right here is my Drives REST project, and so I mentioned earlier about get all, like in this case for my reports. Let me go to that one, because at least from my data repository, I asked you guys, like I think earlier this week or late last week, like what makes up that, and if we were to just even test in Swagger, you're going to see this is going to be this. And I'm just going to do a quick execute here. It's going to get back my data for me. So this is the same thing that you can do over here in the BFF. It's all exposed the same way. There will be a time in your life where what you're going to see, they may be slightly different depending on what the contracts look like, for the most part. But I would say for the most part, I mean, given that we only have one client application, it's Angular. Probably about, like 90% of what you're going to see between like the REST service and your BFF is probably going to be nearly identical or more. So let me go ahead and refresh this.
Yeah, and we really need to change the naming convention on endpoints so they do not set get all, etc. They just follow the standard REST convention. If it's reports, then API is going to call something like SFPS reports and / reports, and the actual verb is going to define what operation is performed. Delete should be not apostrophe delete on delete operation. So I guess patch and update, and
Sure.
it should be
And these
enforced.
are these are easy changes to make because
yeah,
it's just
that's
templating code.
making
So
sure.
yep. So just let me know what you want, Val. You know, because of the simplicity reasons, because
Yeah.
you know, the get all is nice for demos, because in this case, for example, you know, it's able to this you know, this now loads pretty quick. This is 119 records that are coming in that I guess you would see in your drop-down list if you were doing T1 for 2023. So this is what you're seeing here. So the like I said, tomorrow I'll be completing the automation and then making whatever updates you guys want over the next, you know, well, this is my full-time thing. So you know, as we have a need to make life easier for developers, we're going to enforce other standards. You know, I went with this because again, it's nice for demo purposes, but in our template, we actually have config for this. We don't need to actually do the gets at all, and we can just do CRUD if we want, just if for it to be like that. And then we can also name them whatever you want as well. Let's see what else. I believe that was really it. I mentioned this also is that, you know, this is the structural convention that you guys currently have. And so tomorrow, Friday, you're going to see these models and the service both getting fully generated. And we'll probably have other commands in the future, you know, as you guys start to use the application, I mean, the stack more and sort of to write more code. We're going to find a lot of other areas in which we're going to want commands written for. So any questions on implementation, the code that was submitted, thoughts just in general?
Looks good.
Not for now.
Great. And then has anybody in this call not seen this stuff yet? Aziz, you're pretty new. Have you seen any of this yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Great. Well, you know, I would say we're probably nearing the finish line of when we'll probably start handing this stuff off to the development team to start using. I'll probably spend a lot more time next week with Val, just kind of getting the final things done so that we can start to get this stuff on your plate. I'll go through a training exercise when we get, you know, over that line and start to use this in our day-to-day development efforts, meaning, you know, I'll get you guys set up with your CodeFactory licenses and all that stuff, and make sure that your environments are set up right. I mean, it's just a runtime that you have to go install through the marketplace, and then, you know, go out and request it's a free license you have to get, but that's it. So it's really easy to set up, but I'll walk you guys through all of that, and we'll start, you know, going through a couple of these examples together. So the idea being here is that, you know, by the time that Val and I hand this over to you guys, you know, I suspect that, you know, from the global app model all the way through the data repository layer, as you're seeing today, that this stuff is going to be fully implemented, and so that when you're starting with something, if Val says, yep, I don't want any gets to start, or maybe I just want a get with the primary key, but I don't want the get all. So, you know, we'll drop that from all of the repositories. Again, it's just a config thing, so I'll just regenerate them without it. And then what we'll do is, you know, every sprint, you know, as you need, let's say that I need SFPS reports to hydrate a drop-down list, and that, you know, that UI code we need to mock out or like have that data accessible to us next sprint. I'm going to try to work with Val and the team to make sure that, you know, he and I are generating these things for you guys a sprint ahead, so that by the time that you're working on them, they're there, you know. And ideally, I mean, obviously, if we can get more than one sprint ahead, then great. But ideally, minimally, we would be at that point where, like very soon, where we should be doing this. So I suspect that by the time that we're done, Val, with you know, let's say the full stack generation, and we have, you know, our REST services that are fully reflected to showcase all, let's say, entities, and then whatever methods we're going to be adding as well. I suspect that when we get to that point, at least the code that we will have generated will probably be over 1 million lines of code. That's probably an easy number, I would say. But it'll be a pretty impressive thing. So I'm I'm glad we're at this point. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out to myself or Val. And we'll have another touch point probably either sometime next week or the week after. All right, so it's easy.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks, Roger.
Yep, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome. I'll see you.
Bye.